Hello, and many thanks for joining us again on the program People, Politics, and Power. I am Imonia Marere. In our last edition of this program, we did a preview of President Bola Tinubu's state visit to the United Kingdom. The two-day state visit has come and gone, and for so many, is regarded as a successful visit. It delivered optics and a measure of diplomatic warmth. But besides the ceremony, the outcomes invite a more critical assessment. This is our focus on this edition of the program. Now, economically, announcements around the export, finance, and infrastructure were made, suggestive of intent rather than immediate impact. Some analysts say the real test lies in execution. Will these agreements translate into measurable capital inflows, job creation, and relief for a strained Nigerian economy, or join the long list of under-implementation or under-implemented bilateral promises? Now, politically, the visit may have reaffirmed Nigeria's strategic relevance, yet raised questions about priorities. Was the high-level diplomacy aligned with urgent internal realities, or was it more about external validation than internal transformation? Now, culturally, the visit leveraged shared history and diaspora connections, reinforcing soft power ties. But is Nigeria effectively leveraging its diaspora? How soon can the visit prove its value by producing tangible outcomes for Nigerians, quickly, transparently, and at what scale? These are the issues we'll be looking at on the program today, as we take a deep dive in doing a review of the just ended state visit by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to the United Kingdom. My guests are right here in the studio. Dr. Sonny Ofeye is a diplomatic consultant, human and environmental rights activist. Thank you so much, Sonny, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us right here in the studio is, of course, Honorable Cletus Obum. He's a chieftain of the All Progressives Congress and a proponent of what he calls political osmosis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me for this osmotic effect.
Great. And if the communications permits, we should have joining us during the program Professor Ken Ife, a renowned economist, who should be joining us from Kigali, Rwanda, where he is on an international assignment. And we also expect to join us Dr. Namadina Hamza. Dr. Namadina Hamza is a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics at the Federal University in Gusau in Zamfara State. Honorable Obum, let's start this way. There are many Nigerians who think that given the circumstances surrounding that visit, it was a state visit invited by the King Charles III, and you recall that just a few days before, if not the day before, the president proceeded on that visit, there were terrorist attacks in parts of the Northeast, particularly in Maiduguri. There are many who think that perhaps the president ought to have paused before going on that visit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Let me say that for whatever the critics might want to say, it is part of their duty to do so. That alternative views must have to populate the political space in a democracy. So it is within the ranks and rights of democratic actors and political actors to make comments and make observations about what the president and the sovereign does with the nation. Having laid that foundation, let me say that it was going to be politically, diplomatically disastrous for a visit that was not orchestrated from Nigeria. the King of England or the Queen of England at all times in history remains a relevant international figure whose visits and whose meetings are not treated with levity. Not just because Nigeria was a colonial vassal of the British Empire, but because of what Britain is to the world, whether it is America, the world powers today, or to China. You cannot underplay that. Two is that because of our tradition, that there is a very grievous and dangerous part of occurrence in the country, in a part of the country, a day, barely 24 hours before his departure, it would have been a very big demand on the state of Nigeria to decline and call off. If he was there already and that happened, his hosts will understand it, knowing that this is Nigeria. But already he was still in Nigeria and all preparations have been made. In fact, advanced teams have been already taken. We are already on ground in the UK. The British monarchy, the entire media in the world was already there. So it was one of the events that is occurring for the third time in Nigerian history from 1914. It was only the third time a Nigerian sovereign is being invited by the Queen of England. If my records are straight, you will discover that if that is so, it has too many advantages to have been undermined. In any case, even if the commander-in-chief was sitting in Nigeria, he's commander-in-chief of armed forces, not the commander of the war theater. So he was not going to lead the war from the front. Rarely do you find generals taking their guns and being in the forefront of wars until it becomes the Cincinnati case, the Greek general who had to come back from retirement to go and save the city-state of Greece. But in this case, you have your field commanders, you have your theater commanders, you have the army chiefs. There are layers of security operatives that were firmly on ground and taking charge. And don't forget that before he left, they had already given a directive that the entire service chiefs will move to the northeast when there were signs that that was going to happen. So when that happened, it was for them to absorb it. They were not reacting, they were already acting on ground. And this is a new phase of it, if you remember. And asymmetrical warfare of this nature is not a conventional war in which you are anticipating that the enemy is going to come or that intelligence have shown that this is going to happen. Yes, we are aware that there is insurgency, we are aware that there are bandits, we are aware that Boko Haram and ISIS are operating within that east, especially within the Sahel region. But did we also anticipate that suicide bombers were again going to return to the very theater that we had already eliminated them, in which the last president told us that we are technically defeated, in which Sambisa forests have been sufficiently ravaged, and the Nigerian military and security forces have taken charge of that area. So this was a surprise attack, which is typical, but to have asked the president to withdraw his travel was going to ask for too much at the diplomatic stage and at the international stage. It is not allowed. It will not have been very good for the optics. But you can ask me again, what are the benefits? Enough. And I think we can take that as we progress on this discussion.
Of course, that's our main focus of this discussion. Dr. Ofege, let me begin with you by asking what your impression of the entire visit was.
Well, let me use this medium to first of all send my deepest condolence to the victims of the families, to the family who lost people in that attack. Now, the visit to the United Kingdom was very, very positive, diplomatically. Let's not forget that I think the last time the United Kingdom hosted someone in the capacity of the president of Nigeria was actually when President Ibrahim Babangida visited. That was around 37 years ago. And having put all those parameters in place for this sort of state visit, it clearly reflects Nigerian position on the global space, which we have been campaigning that Nigeria should take its rightful place and be the front line on all diplomatic matters when it comes to discussing the issues in the continent of Africa. Now, having looked at the context of all that was discussed, we would take it back and say that, you know, it was a very positive one economically, looking at the cultural, diplomatic, and relationship as a Commonwealth member, the United Kingdom being a colonial, being the one who colonized our country, and rolling out those sort of red carpet for our president. gave Nigeria a positive image, particularly in a time like this when Nigeria has been struggling with credibility on the international stage. So the icing on the cake is that it was a positive visit, and the outcome, as we will discuss as the program progresses, clearly outlined the fact that we needed that sort of diplomatic presence on the global stage. And I think the delegation that went actually rose up to that occasion.
We will come back to the size of that delegation much later, but let's look at issues that are more substantive to this visit. Honorable Obum, for you, was this more about substance or about the optics?
On both grounds, Nigeria scored a stellar, it was a 5-star performance on all fronts. First, here is a country and a president that had been most vilified about credibility of first of his election and of his personality. To be invited was an icing. To be invited by the King of England, who has no pretenses about the hate. When General Abacha was holding Nigeria hostage in a Gestapo style, Britain did not blink to tell it as it is. Even as the international community was standing aloof because of economic benefits, Britain did not pretend. Indeed, if you remember, Nigeria was isolated in the midst of a Commonwealth meeting, and the announcement of the suspension of Nigeria was made. I remember clearly that the Nigerian representative in that delegation was sufficiently embarrassed. And in fact, he came out to also disown his own country and did that. And he's still alive. An elder statesman. So, to now imagine that 7 years after, Britain does not look at what the world looks at. Nigeria is like its first son across the globe, including America. If you put America here and put Britain here and put Nigeria, Britain will pick Nigeria first as its partner, because Nigeria has historically, militarily, economically, done so much for Britain and the British Empire, if not the entire world, from the First World War to the Second World War, down to the Civil War in Nigeria, up to the forces that are fighting in Africa to keep Africa steady, from the Congo to Sierra Leone, to Liberia, to Somalia recently, where South Sudan was created by Nigerian General Moses Obi, who created the Nigerian army and then stabilized the forces in that country. Nigeria is a foremost country whose contribution to the world Britain does not want to forget and want to undermine. So inviting a president in the capacity of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was a befitting tribute and recognition of the fact of the role Nigeria has to play internationally and on the African continent. As no greater a legend than Nelson Mandela will tell you that the fall of Nigeria is the fall of Africa and the rise of Nigeria is the rise of Africa. And as far back as 1975 in Angola, Murtala Mohammed had made the point that Africa has come of age. He was referring to Nigeria. And when Gaddafi repeated and echoed that we must have an African Union, they were looking up to Nigeria. And today, you can find it, economically speaking, that the blinking of a Dangote refinery in Lagos is the blinking of the African, if not the West African sub-region especially, and the African continent. So it is a major player on the international scene. So this visit has, again, announced to Nigerians who are in doubt about what Nigeria means to the world to learn. If, for example, Nigeria had written to Britain to say we want to come and pay state visit and it was turned down, these same naysayers would have gone to town with the story of the rejection of Nigeria as a pariah state. These same naysayers would have been awash on social media to show how Nigeria has been sufficiently deprecated, as if that adds a feather to the cap of their infamy. That to be a renegade, to be an anti-Nigerian receives international award and accolades. I do not know what Nigerians want to gain by not promoting this fact. The economics of it, the political economic sphere, from the economic political sphere of it, you will understand that Nigeria has scored a goal, has scored a major point, but whether the details are going to be worked out, like you are talking about timelines, diplomacy is not a time bomb. Diplomacy is not a keystone technology that you press a button and it works and fast forwards. It doesn't work like that. Layers of diplomatic and diplomaties have to take place for us to get to what we want.
Let's leave the timelines alone for now and look at what we have as agreements, for instance. The substance of what was signed. They are majorly economic, immigration, and of course, the cultural aspect of these agreements. Let's look at the economics. I know you are not an economist. I was hoping that we will be able to get Professor Ken Ife and Dr. Hamza, who are economists, to join us on the program and break down the economic agreements. But for you, how substantive are those agreements that we entered into? The two major ones is the economic aspect of it, which had to do with infrastructure and, of course, trade between both countries.
Well, just like you said, I'm not an economic expert, but I was able to look at the economic aspect of this visit. Looking at the Apapa Wharf, we all understand the way it has affected our economy because of either being overcrowded, using old technology, and not being able to meet the volume of cargoes that come into the airport, delaying, and sometimes even companies and individuals who import things into the country have to use alternative ports like the Benin Republic ports. I mean, the contract clearly showed that they signed a deal of almost 800 million.
746
yes,
million pounds.
746 million pounds, you know, that will improve the infrastructure and thereby also create jobs and then expand our port potential and also deal with some of the overcongestion that the port is already facing. That's an economic visit. Then let's look at the immigration aspect that, like you rightly mentioned. For the first time, I am saying, even though some areas may require further explanation that needs to be looked into as a diaspora Nigerian. You know, when you have a thing like the UK letter, the way they define it, being issued by the UK authorities on the return of people who overstayed their visa, and people who have criminal background, and people who are either
who have exhausted their appeal for asylum.
For asylum to be returning to the country. How do you define that? How do you create that? How do you justify those letters with evidence? How do you convince? What is the role of the Nigerian immigration, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the embassies involved? How do you make sure that the letter is not taking the rights from certain people who do not need to be deported? Because I live in the Netherlands, for instance. We've had cases where the people have been returned while they still have some pending legal cases. They've not exhausted all the legal immigration cases. Some are on appeal. They've not they are returned back. You know, so how do we deal with that aspect of it? So that is one area we have. Ensure that be along with that funds available for reintegration when they come back. Who are you giving these funds to? Who is going to manage this fund? How are we sure that these funds will actually go to the right people, the actual victims of this deportation? You know, so I think it has actually come to a time where even though we want to challenge the immigration agreement, we should look at some of the people who have been picked from the streets, you know, hurriedly put together, TC issued, returned to Nigeria, leaving behind a lot of what they've worked over the years for in the country. So I think that the moment we begin, and also when you go to any negotiating table, whether on the bilateral, multilateral level, you want to sign treaties, you want to sign MOUs, you cannot win all. You know, the reason for the economic benefit comes with also, you know, making sure that Britain want to be sure that some of the backlog of immigration of people who are supposed to face deportation are, you know, taken out instead of going through the bureaucratic long process of trying to get them travel certificates to come back to the country. So for me, I think we have come to this point now where there will be transparency, But we really need to ensure that the due process is followed, the victims are not taken along. Particularly, some critics are saying that it could be an avenue for even the British government to carry out the Rwanda-style immigration approach, where any nationality is brought to Rwanda and then Rwanda decide what they do with them at the end of the day. But I think the president was very emphatic on that aspect in the MOU that, you know, it has to be Nigerians. It has to be. But then the question comes again, how do you prove that the person is a Nigerian? Some Nigerians are in the diaspora that don't have immigration record. They don't have immigration record, so you just cannot pick them on the street because they have Nigerian asset and then decide that these people are deserving of the so-called UK letter and be brought back.
Is that likely going to be a sore point? Because from records that at our disposal, for instance, about 961 Nigerians are said to have exhausted their asylum appeal rights. And so those may be the first set of
Yes.
Nigerians that are to be brought. Then another 1,110 Nigerians who that are regarded as offenders are also awaiting deportation. And then the other category, of course, that you have, I mean, those who have criminal records and what have you, convicted offenders, and then visa overstays and all of that. Now, is that likely going to be a sore point where you see a situation where they can randomly pick on Nigerians in the United Kingdom and issue those papers and get them back into Nigeria?
Yes, I am afraid that may happen. I am afraid that may happen because, you know, and that is why I think the Nigerian embassy really need to play a very big role. The Nigerian High Commission in the UK really need to play a very big role by engaging some of these immigration civil society organizations that carry out oversight function over what the British Home Office does. We've seen the British Home Office involved in scandals that are not even supposed to be scandals, so you cannot be sure that we will not have people who are going to be victims of this process, whereas they did not meet the condition for the return. So what are you attaching to the UK letter? How convincing? What is the timeline? Does it really give space for these people? Is there going to be legal redress? Can you appeal such decision? Those are the things. And then again, the dignity of our returnees. That is also a very big problem that most people are not emphasizing. I don't know if the Nigerian government really looked into this aspect. I just came in from Paris with Air France flight. There was a deportee on board. You know, the idea of putting handcuffs on a person who cannot be violent in a departure hall is also disgraceful. So we should add that these are human beings, these are people. In some cases, you know, their crime was that they overstayed their visa and all that. So even when you've gotten all the legal requirement to return them, please return them with dignity. Don't, like in France, for instance, a deportee is brought from the outside of the deportation facility, going through the same process like every other traveler, getting all the unnecessary attentions for wrong reasons. So the way we treat them when they are returned back should also be taken into perspective. But most especially, I think the best way for the Nigerian to look into how they reach the conclusion that this returnee deserve the UK letter should be to work. I mean, there are a lot of, I know some NGOs who actually carry out oversight function on what they do within the within the Home Office. So they should work, align with those people so that we can ensure that those who are really, really within the confine of this agreement are the ones that are actually brought back, that victims will not suffer unnecessary consequences because of this.
Yes, Honorable, you want to talk on that before I bring you back to the issue of
this issue
economics?
is vexatious to me. First of all, we are pretending too much in this country. Who seeks asylum? What was the basis for the asylum? These are some of the things we are talking about. Escapees who think that they can't come through any means into other countries and tell you that Nigeria is a scam, walk into one country, and then tells you that they are, as asylum means there is an immediate danger, either by natural causes or by political persecution, political victims of political persecution.
There are also those who
Religious
maybe
persecution.
Religious
yes,
persecution. Religious
yes,
persecution.
Yes, terrorism
Exactly.
and all
Very
of that.
good. Now, let me now tell you this. This is precisely where the problem comes from. And then others who carry genuine visas and then overstay. What is the purpose of a visa or a visit? I'm going to stay for 2 weeks, and then you are there for 2 months. And then when you are accosted, you say you should be dignified. You are running, what are you saying? We are running away from the scam in Nigeria from religious persecution. And we walk into your studio here, walk back into the streets. You are coming from Gambarungala, you are coming from Goza, you are coming from Sambisa, and then you are not even near the forest. Another person is coming from Birningwari forest, and then another person is coming from Owo, and says the church was bombed there 3-4 years ago, and therefore he ran for asylum to the United Kingdom, or to UK, or to Canada. These are the bases for which Nigerians get back and then get embarrassed and scandalize the country. My point is this. What I agree with you totally is the indignity which they are being returned. But that they should be returned, this is not the first time. In 1975, under the Murtala Mohammed regime, the Equatorial Guinea authorities started persecuting Nigerians there, and were maltreating them. But Murtala Mohammed went into that place and brought them here. What did he do? He created camps for them across the country. But in the modern age, then there were farms. Now the farms could be computer farms. They could be skills acquisition farms. For those who, for example, the criminals, who ought naturally to be in prison. But you now bring them here and convert them. Just what you do in Kirikiri and our prisons. I've seen somebody graduate from Kirikiri prison to get a PhD from Kirikiri. He came out here and said so for wrong reasons, and only for the person who put him in prison to come and confess that he was in charge. What we are saying about these people is that if it is about returning them, Nigeria has a capacity to create spaces for these people to exist and come back and live a normal life, acquire skill, and live in Nigeria, where, especially those who seek asylum. The third position, the other position which you wanted us to discuss was the issue of the benefits and the economic, the infrastructure.
Yes, we'll come back to that, but let me push quickly, because I want to push one other aspect within.
Yes.
What do you expect? And maybe the two of you could actually jump in on this. What do you expect the Nigerian government to do for these possible returnees? What kind of conditions should be created to accommodate them when they return? Because like you said, some of them may actually have lost touch with their roots.
Yes. Well, let me differ from my colleague on what you've just said. You are not an immigration officer. You're not trained to assess people on the merit or demerit of their political asylum claim. Now, you're sitting in front of somebody who actually left this country almost 31 years ago and asked for political asylum at the Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands. Now, every country has a template for assessing genuine political asylum seekers. So, when anyone goes outside of this country and asks for political asylum, it is left for the host country to assess the political asylum claim and determine whether the person is up for a political refugee status or up for humanitarian refugee status. There are many different ways with which if you don't achieve the layer of a refugee status, you can achieve the second layer of a humanitarian status. Health reasons could also be another aspect of it. When you look at the current insecurity situation in Nigeria currently, you will agree with me that a lot of Nigerians deserve political protection when they somehow find their way outside of the country. Whether their stories are true or false, it is left for the host country authority to put in. They have all the mechanism in place to be able to assess that. We have the the new EU entry-exit rules, which is already digitalizing people who, from when you apply for your visa to when you enter. From now on, there will be no stamp on your passports anymore. So when you enter, they've taken your thumbprint, they've taken your digital. There are also consequences when you overstay your visa. You could get a 10 years ban, you could get a 5 years ban. So it's already punitive on its own. So we're not in a place to sit here and then claim that Nigeria is a safe place. And then so people who have genuine reason for asylum protection are being undermined because of public commentaries that are coming from places, from media like
They
this.
are
Now,
genuine.
having said that,
Very genuine.
yes,
and germane, because we have also the criminal
having
people
said
who
that, you
do
have
that.
religious persecution, you have terrorist attack taking over everywhere, you have people who are stranded right now, you have potential refugee people, but their only disadvantage now is that they don't have the means to get to where they can seek political protection. Now, what the government should be looking at is what drives people to leave the country. Look at the UK, for instance. We've seen brain drain. A lot of our established people that are supposed to build our middle class are leaving the country, selling their stuff, struggling on a yearly basis, paying the UK authority to renew their visa. Some pay as much as 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 pounds. Equate that to Naira value. So, you know, and then the UK government is also saying that we are helping them. We want to look into that. But we are also helping the economy because they work, they bring their families in, the wife will work, they pay taxes, you know. So what we need to do is, like you rightly said, now that the government has signed this agreement on repatriation of our citizens back home, what do you do? How do you bring them? How do you receive them at the port of entry, where they are coming from, whether Lagos, whether Abuja, whether Port Harcourt? How do you receive them? They said the funds are going to be available, but that should not end there. The Nigerian government should also make funds available for them to reintegrate themselves. We're going to have people who have lived in the UK for 20 years, 25 years, who have lost touch with what is happening on the ground. So we need to start, we need to create, and then don't also forget the traumatic torture of it. Now, how do we even look at those who have protracted illnesses that we cannot give the proper medical care? Are we looking at that human rights aspect of their lives? There are some people who are under kidney dialysis. Are you going to put somebody on kidney dialysis and because he has gotten the so-called UK letter to be repatriated into this country where we all know how much it costs to do one dialysis in a day? Have we looked at people who have psychological and psychotic conditions who require medical attention? Are there exemptions to these rules even though the asylum has failed? There are people who are under medication even though the asylum has failed. In some cases, we see cases in the Netherlands where some people are having legal battle on paternalship or trying to claim that they have a paternity. I have a son. I am supposed to be there for my child. We've seen people forcefully taken out of a family union. You know, where you take I have 4 children. I have a granddaughter. Just imagine with the role I play in my family today, and for some reasons, maybe my asylum failed, and I've been looking for all the legal means to be able to fight to stay, at least for family grounds. Under the European Convention on Human Rights, you can also allow people to stay because they've been able to establish sufficient family presence in your country. Would there be waivers to these rules? So this is what the Nigerian government should come back and look at. But let me end with this. Let me conclude with this one. Now, like you rightly said, like you said, it is not a matter of signing treaties and doing MOUs. And I was in Beijing, China. One of the complaints that I got from most of the Chinese investors was that the Nigerian president will come with all the paraphernalia of delegation. They will sign mouth-watering document. They will go back to their country. The country in itself set up all the parameters to engage so that all these things can start to get into action. But nobody responds.
Implementation.
Does the ministry have direct email address where they can be accessed? Who are we going to talk to? Who are we going to reach out to? So all of this should be put in a way that as we begin to scrutinize what the positive outcome is, we should be able to also say, well, the government has improved in this perspective. The president was also in the Netherlands where they signed some MOU. Where is the state of that agreement today? He was in France, where he signed a lot of deals. Where is the state today? Some of those countries where he even signed, we don't even have a substantive ambassadors. You know, look at, and the presence of ambassadors, now we just announce ambassadors. We announce designations for those ambassadors with less than, I think the next election is January. Who does that? You know?
So, Honorable, yes. what, in your view, should the Nigerian government be doing on its own as far as this immigration MOU is concerned, before we go to the economic aspects?
Let me say that if you put me to take charge of that, I'll be very biased about those who, for example, falsely present this country to get asylum and begin to use court cases in those countries. So it's a typical Nigerian problem that even Britain today is dealing with. I have a lot of my cousins that I sponsored in school who came back here and stubbornly wanted to return in spite of my persuasion that you should be invited and not to make yourself look for cheap labor. But when they insisted on it and they run into trouble, you come back to Nigeria. You say, oh, on the terms and conditions of that country, I can qualify for all kinds of asylum. Why do you want to be a refugee, for Christ's sake? In any case, let us assume that the situation is so bad in Nigeria that you have to seek refuge elsewhere. And then you are now to return to your country. For me, the country owes you a duty, first as a citizen. It's because the country owes nobody a duty. That's why nobody wants to die for Nigeria. Because most people think, unlike some of us, and especially those who benefited so heavily, you virtually go to school in Nigeria free. If you do a PPP, purchasing power parity, we go to Nigeria almost free. To graduate a medical doctor in Nigeria, if you put it in Naira and put it in pounds and dollars and yen, you will discover we are going to school here almost free. But when after all that, you turn around and say Nigeria is a scam and turn around to go and give Nigeria problems on conditions that are favorable to you. When those conditions turn against you, you turn back to the same scam and ask for rescue and intervention. What Nigeria should do for those who have genuine cases, like he said, some people have invested so much in those countries, paid taxes, built houses, and then you yank them off without taking care of those responsibilities and taking care of those assets. For Nigeria to do that, you must profile everybody, and the departments charges should be created. Internal affairs, foreign affairs should collaborate in a manner that, and then the Diaspora Commission, which has now been created as an omnibus intervention agency, to now take charge of this first profiling should take place by those people before they get to foreign affairs and get to internal affairs and all that. Then create homes for these people and say, do you want to go to school? If you have gone to school, do you want to teach? Do you want to be a soldier? Do you want to be this? That should be profiled and kept there. So on voluntary basis of the repatriated person, he now takes up any of those options, and they should be made available. So as you are coming here, the issue of trauma of being taken away from your root and being away for 20 years will not arise. In any case, which a responsible person, given our tradition, that you grew up here, you are up to 15, 20 years in Nigeria before you leave for any country and go and stay there for 50 years. It is impossible for you not to get back unless you have committed a heinous crime in which you disown even your own roots. A man who does that has already disinherited himself and therefore deserves nobody. So when you disinherit yourself and you are to be rehabilitated, the terms and conditions can no longer be dictated by you. The law won't protect you for your own indolence. The law does not protect the indolent. Now, having forsaken your own rights and you are returning, like I said, first as a father, which is Nigeria, you should have the compassion, the African traditional compassion to say, this our son was once lost, now he's found. How do we rehabilitate him? There should be a home for such persons. They should be created, like I said, Murtala Mohammed did us at 1975, when you had homes and estates created for returnees from Equatorial Guinea. These ones are now foreign and diaspora returnees. Once they are repatriated, they should first be settled there. Then the profiling takes place about what do you want to do. And in that way, the person is brought back here. Those who have ailments, for example, that can't be treated in Nigeria, there should be exemptions for them. Those who have psychological and traumatic conditions, psychological crises that are being treated, you can't go and bring someone from the hospital and say, under oxygen, and say, go and return to Nigeria. No human being, not even the very mean character of the white man will make him go and remove somebody from an oxygen pipe and say he should return to Nigeria, or somebody who is under dialysis to say he should return to Nigeria. Even if you require Nigeria paying for the person to get well first before coming back, they will definitely have to do that. Those are the exceptions to the rule. No rule on planet Earth, even before God, there are exceptions to the rule. A man was about to die, a biblical figure, and when he went and prayed to God and said, why do you do this? God gave him additional 15 years. So there are exemptions to all rules, either in heaven or on earth.
So you expect that to happen. All right, let's get back to the economic aspect of this. Okay. The UK Export Finance that will guarantee a £746 million loan for the refurbishing of the Apapa and Tinker Islands. And as part of that agreement, as we know now, the British Steel will supply 120,000 tons of steel for the port projects for a contract valued at about £70 million. That's part of the £746 million pounds loan. And the deal is expected to generate 236 million in supply contracts for the British companies, 20% of the entire project. Now, there are those who are asking questions. Did Nigeria secure reciprocal market access for its exports to the UK? Or is this just a one-way agreement?
Let me say this. You have put 240 and then 70 million as part of what will even go back from the beginning.
Yes.
And in any case, the loan, don't forget, is coming from a British bank that is guaranteeing it. What that means is that the interest and every other such thing remains there. So out of the 700 or something, about 300 or 200 plus will remain already in Britain before you now come back to Nigeria to deal with it. Whichever way you look at it, Nigeria is going to be the overall, at the end of it, beneficiary.
How so?
Let me now tell you this. What you call the ancillary or what you call the multiplier effect of those jobs. The Nigerian informal economy has more than 70% of employees in Nigeria. The mama puts, the drivers, the cyclists who are going to carry workers, the people who are going to collect rents and all that. That is the multiplier effect that people are not looking at. By that alone, you are going to employ more than 40,000 to 50,000 people within that area, within the period of the job. What I should think Nigeria should be thinking about is not that I'm giving you, do you want the port to function or do you want cash? If the port will function thereafter, it's a 2, 3 year, 10-year matter. It is not for the Tinubu administration of 4 years, additional 4 years, 2031. It's beyond that. So I believe that in the overall interest of Nigeria, when you look at it, the bigger picture, what is going to be the benefit for Nigeria? And I say to you that Nigeria stands to gain so much in the long run than in the short term. Once the port is there, the port is not going to generate profit in 10 years. Nigeria might lose so much in 2 weeks, in 3 years of the contract and the sum of money that is going to go there. But thereafter, like he said, there's the congestion. There is the Bakassi Deep Sea Port coming up to decongest the port. There is the Baka in Akwa Ibom. There is another one in Port Harcourt, Onne, and others. But where are the deep waters? Are you going to do dredging all through? But first of all, rather than go to Benin Republic, why don't you expand Tinkan, which was started before even independence? And then by 1937, it was again improved upon and became that. And then the British government handed it to Nigeria. And now we are saying expand it. So Nigeria should be looking at, we need a port, not the money. The money will come after the port has been generated. So it takes us back to what we have done with our economy, in which Ajakuta steel rolling mill and all the steel mills are not functional. So if you now want to do it, do you want us to go and buy from China and then Britain gives you the money to go and buy steel from China or from the US? They will have to supply it. Is that not part of their own benefit? I think so.
You know, the indices of the economic benefit should not be measured by what the mama put person is going to make, what the Okada riders is going to make. Those are very minute parts of the benefit that comes. I will agree with you that where you have, don't forget that most Western loans are tied to, I mean, they're bringing in the money, and of course the British government does not own the money. The banks are going to bring in the money. They're only guaranteeing those loans, investments that are coming in. And then when you look at Nigeria, with the failed Alaja Steel Complex, Ajakuta Steel Complex, they're not functioning. So where you going to get those steels from? So, and like you said, you're not going to be relying on other countries, whereas they're not the one financing the project to bring in all of this. But what that can do, it can open room for foreign direct investments in other areas that are affiliated with that. Therefore, the Nigerian government can use that as a template to start negotiating on how to improve our capacity to produce steel on our own. So with such guarantees coming in, with such market opening up in those areas, there is the tendency that you can bring other countries or private sector-driven investments into the country, even local investments into some of these our steel producing companies. And then people can even look beyond the so-called Alaja and Ajakuta that we have and start to open up their own approach. It will definitely create some kind of job opportunities and all of that. But when you look at it in the sustainable context, from the beginning, we're sure going to lose. Don't forget, you didn't mention monies that will also go to the British people from consultations, from how do you call it, when the companies will come and assess what to do and what not to do, they will be paid for those jobs, and those monies will also be paid, and they will be paid as experts. But what we should also look at is the labor aspect of it. We should not allow such contracts to give room for people who will be employed on a casual basis. If you're looking at port investment, you're looking at a long-term investment. Therefore, any local labor that is tied to any of these investments should be sustainable over time. There should be guarantees added to their employment, not just bringing people to come and work on ad hoc basis and then you disconnect them later on. But in my own overall assessment of it, it is better to have these sort of guarantees ensuring that we can improve on our ports and we can open up our markets, and then the government can look into how to cut the bureaucratic processes that are involved in port activities. When you talk about, you know, our trade deficit, I just came from the Switzerland embassy right now, where even the ambassador was talking about the trade deficit between Switzerland and Nigeria. So we should look at how to cover those gaps, how to ensure that when we import, we have sufficient agro products or anything that we have capacity to produce a massive scale to be exported back into the country to cover these loopholes between countries that we do international business with.
Yeah, I needed to add this point in public discourse. What I don't do is that what I say and do in conferences, I don't bring them here. Nigerians, barely. We did a lot of policy analysis, and most of the time, the people who are supposed to educate, because the media of this is to tell them the whole story in the streets and on the social media platforms is that it was a waste. For instance, because so many people went there who ought not to be there, that is a different ball game completely. But that the visit at all was positive, as we have all agreed here, is not in doubt. But how to explain it to the people who feel they are being shortchanged and who want to use it for political gains is what makes us domesticate and as much as possible utilize the discussion to the point where any listener who can hear minimal English should be able to understand it. What we do at conferences, at economic conferences, we leave it there. So here, we are trying to tell Nigerians that you, even as a private person, can benefit. Like you said, people have money. If we didn't open up the space, Dangote factory, refinery wouldn't be here to save us today. We would be again on invisible NNPC that deals only with papers and barrels on paper and never ever. And I have made the point all the time that we had two governments in Nigeria, the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Federal Republic of NNPC. At no time in our history have any NNPC management been accountable to even the government that it serves. So today, you can now find that by divesting it, government has also talked about power. The states are not taking advantage with all the waterfalls and all the solar and all the sun beat in northern Nigeria for 9 months out of 12 months. We are not still tapping into oil, which the federal government have given powers to states. So here now, you have a seaport in which people can individually. We are training welders in the Niger Delta. NDDC is training so many children on how to deal with underwater things, how to mend ships and other such things. Then when they are now bringing these people, one guarantee, which is what I always advocate in political economy, is that you must domesticate all your staffing. Until you have nobody in Nigeria that can do a particular job, you have no right. If part of it is not going to be, if part of the agreement does not state that, then we're endangered.
Which brings us to the point which you mentioned earlier on, that and you also talked about it now, the government explaining in more straightforward terms. For instance, who are going to be the implementing contractors? Which percentage of it, of the number of firms will come from the UK? Which ones will be Nigerian firms? Who are what kind of joint arrangement are they going to have at the end of the day, so that Nigerians understand the benefits of such an agreement with the United Kingdom? So it does not look as if it's a one-sided agreement.
Deal.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We must go now, and unfortunately, we were unable to connect with Professor Ken Ife, who was to join us from Kigali in Rwanda, and Dr. Namadina Hamza, a senior lecturer in economics at the Federal University in Gusau in Zamfara State. We do apologize for that. But here in the studio, we have had Dr. Sonny Ofere, a diplomatic consultant, a human and environmental rights activist, a diaspora Nigerian. Thank you so much for your time. And Honorable Cletus Obum, not just being a chieftain of the APC, he's also a political economist and a proponent of political osmosis, a former legislator in Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. See you soon.